Radio has always been one of the great mysteries of our modern world. Waves going through the air that you can't see and you can't hear without a special box to decode them. But what if those waves don't just carry your favorite songs, but could carry something more devious and dangerous, something that might even be dead?
What's that? You want to be scared? Come with me. You will experience tales of horror, ghosts, and death. It is not recommended for the weak at heart. Listen in the dark. It's more fun that way. This is Weekly Spooky.
Hello, my spookies. It's Wednesday, and you know what that means. It's time for a little spooky in your weekly. I'm your host and narrator, Enrique Couto, and we have quite the scare fest for you tonight. A story that reminds me of the good old days of sleepovers and campfire stories. As you can imagine, when I was a young man, I loved spinning a yarn for my friends at school or wherever I could, really. A good scary story is a terrible thing to waste. It needs to be shared. And tonight's is a family-friendly affair. So, if you're listening in the car with little ones, they might get a little scared, but they won't hear anything too juicy. But before we get to that show, I just want to say a huge thank you for listening. You guys listening in the off-season, not around Christmas time or Halloween, you guys are who keeps the spooky coming every single week. And I love doing it for you. And all I ask is, please consider leaving us a 5-star rating on your podcast app of choice, whether it be Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or somewhere else. It really does help other spookies find the program. And speaking of other spookies, did you know we have a Facebook group just for all of us to hang out and share things? Usually it's horror-themed memes and strange news stories, but it's completely free to join. It's called Weekly Spookies Tomb of Terror. Just go on Facebook and search Weekly Spookies Tomb of Terror. There are more than 200 of us, all hanging out enjoying the scarier side of life. I hang out there along with many of our authors. So, why not join us? It's a lot of fun. But now, my friends, something is coming over the scare waves, ready to terrify us after these quick words. Terror on Your Radio Dial by Bruce Haney. Josh had always wanted to see a ghost. He was obsessed with the idea of seeing something otherworldly. At only 12 years old, he consumed all the supernatural-related media he could find, which wasn't much in 1992. He had all his brother's old comic books. Most of them were superhero comics, but there were a few issues of Things Beyond This World that he cherished and read over and over again. Josh was also a frequent visitor to the horror section of Boring Encore Video. Yes, Josh lived in a small town known as Boring, Oregon, which he found boring. So, the idea of ghosts and otherworldly things was an escape for him. Josh tried to search the historical archives of the local newspaper for stories, but found little, and it was more time-consuming than a kid his age could handle. But he did know of the Gitter House. All kids knew about that house. It wasn't much to behold. It didn't have fancy architecture, no gargoyles or iron rod fencing. But the house did show its age. The weathered wood of the 3-story house had many layers of peeling paint and numerous layers of shingles on its time-worn roof. A house like that always had its legends. The main one was of an amateur electrical engineer who lived in the house in the 1940s and was obsessed with the power of radio and was using his modified ham radio equipment to try to reach the other side. Josh did find one mention of this man in the papers when he had looked. In 1949, the Boring Herald had a small blurb that read, "Boring man is insane. Carl Gitter of Boring was arrested today after several alleged attacks on neighbors and his family. He was committed to the asylum and will be taken there late this evening or early tomorrow." Josh had been making plans to visit the house, but before he got his nerve up, a family moved in. Luckily for Josh, they had a kid his age named Mike. Josh was quick to make friends with him. Once the friendship was established, he suggested a sleepover. Mike would agree, but always wanted to have it at Josh's house. After the third time of having it at his house, Josh insisted they have it at Mike's. "Dude, we will have way better snack choices at your house," Mike argued. "Yeah, but my parents are always hovering and probably wouldn't approve of us staying up late to watch horror movies." Josh argued back and then remembered something Mike had told him. So he added, "Plus, you're the one that bragged you have your own television," Josh argued. "Yeah, but it's just my parents' old 19-inch set and the colors bleed," Mike explained. "Your own television in your room beats a front room television with hovering parents any day," Josh replied. "Fine," Mike said. That night was perfect for the sleepover because late-night host Madame Goulette was showing 2 back-to-back ghost flicks on Channel 5. Josh, of course, loved horror movies that involved ghosts. Mike was more of a monster kid. One of the reasons that Mike might not have cared for ghosts was because his house was haunted, and Mike had seen a spirit. When Josh first became friendly with Mike, he asked him if he had seen any ghosts there. "That's baby stuff. I don't believe in ghosts," Mike had said and then laughed. But Josh thought Mike might have been hiding something behind that laughter. Later, as the two became closer, Mike revealed that he had seen something spooky in the house. "I only saw something once. It was late at night, and it was when we first arrived with all our stuff after the long drive from our old house. We were supposed to get here in the afternoon and get stuff unloaded, but my dad got us lost taking one of his shortcuts. We were all tired, but we had to unload some stuff into the house, at least the bedding. I had made a couple of trips, and then while my parents were setting up a makeshift area for us to sleep, I went back out to the moving van to grab my radio to see if there were any cool stations in this burb. As you know, that was a waste of time. I checked AM and FM. But while I was messing with the antenna of the radio, trying to find stations, I looked up to the window of the room, the one that's mine now, and I saw a man, and he stared back at me. I stared for a moment, and then he smiled. Then, from my radio, I heard him say, "Welcome home," Mike finished. "Then what?" Josh asked. "That was all he got to say because I was so freaked out I dropped my radio," Mike explained. "So what did you do?" Josh asked. "I ran to my parents. They thought I was crazy, but they searched the house anyways, but found nothing," Mike said. "Did you ever try to reach him again?" Josh asked. "My radio hasn't worked since. It still plays cassettes all right, but the radio part's broken," Mike explained. For the sleepover, because of Mike's story, Josh brought his own radio. He also brought a book called True Facts About Ghosts. The book was more or less a parody of those books for kids like Dinosaur Facts or Bird Facts, the kind with very few words and many full-page color photos. Josh knew it was a bit tongue-in-cheek, but thought that it had some truth to it. Before Josh arrived at Mike's house, he decided that he wouldn't talk about ghosts right away. He would wait until the first movie of the night, so sometime during 13 Ghosts. Since it was a sleepover situation, they didn't have to eat dinner with Mike's folks. They got frozen pizza and generic root beer, which they took up to Mike's room to eat. Mike's room was a typical 80s boys' room. Socks on the floor, magazine cutouts of rock bands on his walls. His only full-size poster was of a hot rod car. Josh had been hoping to feel spooky vibes as soon as they entered his room, since it was where the ghost had been, but everything seemed normal. Josh waited all night as they ate pizza and played video games. Finally, Madame Goulette's Dark Theater started. She introduced 13 ghosts by telling them how the director had a gimmick for when it had played in the theaters. The gimmick was a pair of glasses that you would put on so that you could see the ghosts. Josh decided that this was his cue. "Maybe that's not too far off," Josh said. Mike finished chewing his pizza and then slurped some root beer. "What?" Mike asked. "Maybe you need a device to see or interact with ghosts, like you and your radio. With the radio, you heard him speak," Josh finished. "Dude, ghosts aren't real. I was just tired and it was a new place. Come on," Mike said. "Are you scared to talk about it because we're in the room where you saw him?" Josh asked. "Just shut up about it," Mike replied, and then looked around the room, half expecting to see the figure again. Josh knew that Mike was afraid, so it was kind of mean of him to then say, "Did you know a guy that lived here was found insane and taken to an asylum?" Mike's first response was to punch Josh in the shoulder, and then replied with, "Dude, I said shut up." The boys found the second movie boring. It was called The Terror. It had a couple of big names in the cast, but had little else going for it. Since they were both bored, Josh opened his backpack and brought out his radio and the ghost book. Mike laughed. "Come on, what's with that kid's book?" he asked. "It's the only book that the school library had on ghosts, so give me a break," Josh explained. "You are not going to let this ghost thing go, are you?" Mike said as he took the book from him and started looking through it. "There are many kinds of ghosts. There are vengeful ghosts, residual ghosts, poltergeists, and there are ghosts that are not ghosts at all, like demons that are pretending to be ghosts," Mike read aloud and then laughed. "This book is a joke," Mike said. While Mike looked through the book, Josh turned on the radio and slowly scrolled from the band's left side to the right, scanning and listening for otherworldly voices. Mike looked up at Josh with a raised eyebrow, but said nothing. At this time of night, the sounds that came from it were mostly talk radio and old-timey music that Josh assumed was either Beethoven or Mozart, since that was all he knew of as far as classical music. It wasn't. While he searched the band, he heard Chopin and Tchaikovsky, but he heard no ghosts. "Ghosts have been known to affect electromagnetic waves," Mike read aloud. "What does that mean?" Josh asked. "I don't know, but maybe it has something to do with how ghosts can manipulate radio waves," Mike said, unsure of himself. "Did you know the insane man was a ham?" Josh asked. "A ham?" Yeah, an amateur radio dude," Josh said. "Why do they call them a ham?" Mike asked. "I don't know. They operate ham radios, but why they call the radio ham, I don't know. I didn't check out a book on ham radios," Josh said, annoyed that he didn't know. Mike felt bad that his guest was getting upset, so, against his better judgment, he decided that he would help him and show some interest. "Did you check AM?" Mike asked. "No, just FM," Josh replied. "I think I was on AM when I heard him," Mike said. Josh started to scan through the airwaves on AM, and then Mike tried to talk to the ghost. "Hello? Hello, ghost?" Mike said. No response from the radio. "It's not going to work. Did you really see a ghost?" Josh asked. "Try adjusting the antenna. I was messing with it at the time. I was pointing it towards my room." "I think that's north. Try north," Mike said. Josh followed his directions. After a few seconds, the static got a little louder. Josh adjusted the antenna. While he turned the tuner left and right, under the normal static, he could hear a buzz that seemed to get louder as he moved to the right. Once the buzz was at its peak, he turned the volume up a little more and moved the antenna around. Then, the buzzing stopped. Mike and Josh froze and listened intently. Mike felt goosebumps forming on his arms. Josh thought about adjusting the antenna a little bit more or turning the tuner back to the left a bit, but neither moved, and eventually, clear as day, they heard.
"Hello, boys,"
the ghost spoke. The voice came from the radio, but the boys looked around for the man. So far, he hadn't appeared. "Who are you?" Josh asked.
"I am Mr. Gitter."
Mr. Gitter replied. "What do you want?" Mike asked.
"You reached out to me,"
Mr. Gitter replied, and then laughed to himself. As he laughed, Mr. Gitter started to fade into existence near the window. The two boys watched, and suddenly, they no longer had any more questions to ask. Mr. Gitter was nicely dressed in pressed slacks and a sweater with only one blemish. Right where his heart should be, there was a large hole that had blood dripping from it every second or so, like his heart was still pumping, ever so slightly. The two boys watched as the blood stained the sweater further. Mr. Gitter noticed their fascination.
"Oh, this old thing?"
Mr. Gitter said while poking his finger through the hole in his chest.
"Sometimes the cost of intellectual intrigue is high."
Mr. Gitter continued and laughed loudly, revealing teeth that were still white, but looked larger than normal as his gums had receded, revealing the roots of his teeth. Josh thought to himself, how do those teeth even stay in? Mr. Gitter floated towards the two boys.
"Are you ready to come to the other side?"
Mr. Gitter asked. Mike was terrified and snatched the radio away. "Get out of my room!" Mike yelled, and then turned the dial as quickly as he could. Mr. Gitter disappeared as soon as the channel was switched.
"It will continue to rain for the next 4 days. Sunday might possibly have a break, so plan on getting all those outside chores done then, but..."
a female voice said on the radio before Mike turned it off. Both of the boys were relieved. "Let's never do that again," Josh said. "Yeah," Mike agreed. But they were young and their wills were not great. Before the night was through, they had made a plan to contact him one more time so that they could record his voice on Josh's radio. Something to impress the other kids with at school on Monday morning. Neither of the boys had a fresh cassette, but Josh knew the trick where you put tape over a hole in the side so that the player would think it was a blank tape. It took Mike a while to decide which of his tapes he would sacrifice. He decided on Bruce Springsteen's Born in the USA, Side A. It wasn't one of his favorites. He did Side A over Side B because B had Glory Days on it, which he liked. By the time the second movie had ended, they were ready. They might have tried to waste more time to build up their nerve, but all the television stations had gone off the air for the night. With nothing else to do, they decided it was time to reach back out to Mr. Gitter. Mike handed the tape to Josh, who wasted no time putting it in and hitting the record button. Then he turned the tuner to find Mr. Gitter again. It took him a few minutes, but he never looked at the dial when he had tuned him in the first time.
"Hello again, boys,"
Mr. Gitter's voice said out of the speakers. Before he could speak again, Josh pulled out his ghost book to ask Mr. Gitter some questions. Are you a vengeful spirit? A poltergeist? What kind of ghost are you?" Josh asked.
"What type of ghost am I?"
Mr. Gitter asked while chuckling to himself.
"I wouldn't call myself a ghost. I have merely switched from one plane to another. A greater plane of existence. Come with me and see. You'll understand shortly, and all your questions will be answered,"
Mr. Gitter said as he approached the two boys. This was the moment they panicked about last time. This time, they remained brave. Josh looked at the radio dial just in case they did panic. 1170 AM. "We will not go with you," Josh said firmly. "Yeah," Mike said, sounding less confident.
"You have no choice,"
Mr. Gitter informed them. The two boys exchanged worried glances. "Bail?" Josh asked Mike. "Bail!" Mike yelled. They were chickening out again. Josh grabbed the dial and went to turn it, but it wouldn't move. He was a smart boy, though. He pressed the power button instead, but there was no luck there either. It wouldn't budge. Gitter was getting stronger. Josh dropped the radio, but that act did not stop Mr. Gitter. Mr. Gitter, in fact, got brighter, becoming nearly as flesh and blood as they were. The hole in his chest even started pumping blood out faster while the lights in the house began to flicker. In response, the boys ran downstairs. Mike's parents had already gone to bed, so they didn't notice the lights were flickering. His parents did wake up moments later when they heard the downstairs radio turn on. The sound of various stations could be heard as it tuned itself to 1170.
"Come on, boys. Everyone is waiting,"
Mr. Gitter's voice said, coming out of the downstairs radio at full volume. At that point, Mr. Gitter was powerful enough that it didn't matter where the antenna was pointed. The next sound the boys heard, as Mr. Gitter went to grab them, was the door of Mike's parents' bedroom opening. But it was too late. Mr. Gitter was able to reach the two boys and grab them in a big bear hug while laughing. The volume of his laughter lowered as all three of them began fading out of our world. Mike's dad entered the living room 1 second too late. They were gone. A moment later, all 6 light bulbs above his head in the aging chandelier exploded, and he could have sworn he heard a faint voice coming from the radio that laughed while it said,
"End of broadcast."
Mike's parents moved away from Boring a few months later because Josh's parents blamed them for the disappearance, and seeing them around town at the Boring Country Store was hard for them to deal with while managing their own mourning. Mike's parents couldn't deal with packing up their son's room, so they hired movers who prepared all of Mike's things to be donated. One mover even took the tape from the radio and put it back in its case. He thought about taking the tape. Who would know? But the mover was more of a new wave guy anyway. He did empty the kid's piggy bank before packing it. The recording was eventually found by accident. A guy bought a bunch of cheap cassettes from the thrift store for a road trip. He was shocked when instead of hearing Bruce Springsteen, he heard weird audio of a creepy man talking to some kids. He thought it was interesting enough that he called into an AM talk show about conspiracies and the supernatural. The host was curious and had airtime to kill, so he agreed to air the tape. So then, once again, Mr. Gitter's voice came across the airwaves.
"Hello again, boys."
After this airing, rumors of young kids disappearing after playing with their radios, trying to hear Mr. Gitter, started to spread. But those are just playground urban legends, aren't they? Well, that was a classically scary story. I really love stories that remind me of that simple innocence of the childhood ghost story. And Bruce Haney always delivers. Big thanks to Bruce for his terrifying tale that I got to share with all of you. And if you like his work, give Bruce a little search on Amazon. He hasn't written any horror novels yet, but his writing is top-notch, and I highly recommend you check it out. As you're listening to this, my spookies, I'm actually on set producing a film called A Hard Place, a monster movie thriller that I think you'll all enjoy, and I'll be sure to let you know when it's available for your viewing pleasure. But that doesn't mean I'm not here for you on Wednesday to make sure you get your dose of spooky. And an extra special thank you to everybody that's been joining up on Patreon. Our Patreon is on fire right now with 2 bonus shows every month, and it's all part of a series by Rob Fields called The Weekend. So if you go to weeklyspooky.com and click on Patreon, for as little as $1 a month, you can hear every installment of the exclusive series The Weekend. And an extra special thank you to our Patreon podcast boosters, folks who pay just a little bit more to hear their names on the show. And they are Johnny Nix, John Callan, Bobbletopia.com, Jenny Green, Brent McCullough, Karen Weemet, Jack Kerr, and Craig Cohen. If you head to weeklyspooky.com and click on Patreon and select a $15 or higher pledge, you can hear your name at the end of every show, just like theirs. But now, my friends, it's time for me to get out of here. I have to get back to my other job, but don't worry. I'll be right back here on Wednesday and next week on Monday with Monthly Spooky. So until then, stay safe, but also stay scared and don't fiddle with that radio dial too much, or you might find something you don't like. For myself, for my producer Dan Wilder, my executive producers Rob Fields and Mark Shields, and my composer Ray Mattis, talk at you next time.
Thank you for listening. Make sure to find your way back next week. But for now, you are safe. Trust me.